Hey guys, Chris Fix here, and today we're going to take this monster truck looking car and we're dropping her down to the right height this car should have had from the factory. And we're going to do that using coilovers. Now, if you didn't see the last coilover video where I explained what coilovers are and their benefits, as well as showed you how to install front coilovers and camber caster plates so we could lower the front of the car and adjust the wheel alignment, I'll be sure to link that video in the description so you can check it out. But in this video, we'll be installing these coilovers into the rear of the car, which is completely different than the front setup. And after we get those installed, we're gonna get the car laser aligned and then head to the track to really test out this new suspension. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm really excited to get these in, so let's get started. And the first thing we need to do is safely support the frame of the car on jack stands. Then lower the suspension down and remove the jack. Now, before we get started disassembling our suspension, anytime you jack up your vehicle, you want to make sure that you chalk off the front wheels so the car doesn't roll. I like to slide a wheel underneath the frame of the car just in case, and you want to come over here and just give the car a good solid shake to make sure it feels stable. Everything's good here, so we're safe to start working on the car. Now, our coilover is a shock and spring combined, which means we're going to be removing the spring and the shock, and we're going to start with the shock. And in order to remove the shock, we have to put a slight load on the suspension, so we have to jack up the suspension just a little bit. And the reason why we want to support the suspension is because right now this coil spring is forcing the suspension down, and the shock is holding it up. If we unbolt the shock, the suspension is just going to drop real quick. Now that we have the jack holding the suspension up, when we unbolt the shock, it won't move. And in order to get to that top bolt, we have to come around back here, pop the trunk, we'll get this carpet out of the way, and we'll remove the trim, which gives us access to our bolt. This is a 15 millimeter, and it's coming off pretty easily. And with the nut removed from the top of the shock, we could go from the trunk back down to the suspension, and then we could follow our shock all the way down to the bottom bolt. With this, we're gonna need a wrench on one side and a ratchet on the other, and loosen up that bolt. And the nut will come right off, and then slide the bolt out. And now our shock should come right out just like that. Now our coilover is gonna get installed right where the shock used to be. The problem is this quad shock right here hits the new coilover. So we're gonna have to take it out to make room for our coilover. And this is easy enough to remove. There's an 18 millimeter nut up here, good, and a 15 millimeter bolt down here. Good. And with that, the quad shock comes right out. And we might as well remove that steel bracket that holds the top of the quad shock in. It only takes a few extra seconds to unscrew these bolts. This is actually pretty thick steel, so it's kind of heavy, and there's no need for it anymore. But I don't want those two bolt holes just being wide open like that, so I'm gonna screw the two bolts in to seal up those holes. Good, and we're almost ready to remove our spring, but before we could do that, there's a brake line right here that's gonna get pulled on if we don't loosen it up from this mount right here. So let's remove the brake line holder bolt, which is a 10 millimeter. Good. And with that bolt removed, that allows us to move our brake line down like that and gives it more room so we could drop the suspension. And we don't have to worry about this getting pulled on. And the reason why we're dropping the suspension is so that we can remove our coil spring. Now in this car, when we drop the suspension down, we'll be able to unload the pressure from the coil spring enough that we could take it out safely. And we'll do that just by loosening up the jack and letting it go down slowly. But on some cars, you're not able to do that. Even when you let the suspension down, this coil spring will still be under a lot of pressure. And in that case, you'd use a spring compressor like this. A kit like this is inexpensive and well worth it. You just want to make sure that you find one that has these safety pins that lock into place. I'll link this one down in the description for you. So what you're going to do with these, you can see how this has a little curve. Well, you just put that right around the spring, and then you lock that pin in place, and then you put the other end around the spring, and you lock that into place. Now do the same thing on the opposite side. And you could use an impact gun or a normal ratcheting wrench. They'll both work. It's just a lot easier to use an impact gun. And what you do is you tighten down one side just a little bit, and then tighten down the other side a little bit. And you want to tighten both of these sides down back and forth so they tighten evenly. And notice how the spring is compressing. And that will compress the spring and make it smaller so that you could remove it from the car. And you want to make sure that you do this correctly because there's a lot of pressure in this spring right now, so it can be dangerous. But luckily in this car and many other cars, you don't need the coil spring compressor. So now we're going to slowly let down the suspension all the way and just get a pry bar in there and pop that coil spring out. Good. And now we could remove the spring. And with the coil spring removed, we are almost ready to install our coilover. But first we need to install the lower shock bracket, so we're gonna have to remove the stock bracket. So get a wrench and loosen up the nut that holds this in. Once you get it loose, you could spin the bracket and remove it the rest of the way like that. Now let's add the new bracket and start with the top bolt. As you can see, there's really not a lot of room to get your hands in here for the washer, so a needle nose pliers definitely helps with the job. Next, we could get the bottom bolt in, and it's a lot easier to get the washer and then the nut onto the bolt. So with the bracket hand tightened in, let's put the coilover in the bracket, slide the bolt through, and hand tighten the nut. Now we could jack the suspension up and inspect for clearance around the coilover, and already I need to stop because I could see a spot we're making contact. So we're actually making contact with our bracket. You can see the spring seat nut right there is contacting the bracket right up here. So I'm gonna mark the area that we need to trim. Let's lower the suspension back down, remove the coilover, and undo our bracket. Good thing we only hand tighten these, so this will go a lot quicker. We're gonna need to trim right there and right there on our bracket. So let's get this in the vise, and I'm using a grinder to remove the metal we just marked on the bracket. So just grind it down until the paint's gone, just like that. And since we did grind down this area and remove the zinc coating, I want to cover the metal with some paint to prevent rust. And I'm using a silver paint marker so it matches the color. Now, let's install the bracket, get that top washer in there, and the top nut. Good. Get that bottom bolt in, then the washer, and then the nut. Now we could tighten the bottom bolt down, and then the top bolt. Good. And finally, we could get the coilover in and slide that bolt in place and hand tighten the nut. And with the coilover in place, now we're gonna go and test fit it again, and we wanna line it up to that hole right up there, like that. And then jack up the car all the way so the weight of the car is on the suspension. So now we could go underneath and take a look. And the clearancing we did here with our grinder worked perfect. We now don't have any issues with our coilover hitting the bracket. It's also a good idea to inspect around the coilover, and I don't see any issues. So let's get up in the trunk and tighten down the top of the coilover. Add the washer and then the nut, and tighten it down to 60 foot-pounds of torque. I also like to mark the bolt and the stud with a black line, so at a quick glance we could tell if that loosened up. All right, and we are almost done. So there's only one more bolt on that coilover that we need to tighten down. We'll do that in a second. I already installed that coilover. It's the same exact process on both sides. So I did that already. It's completely installed. Now would be the part where you put your interior in. I have my interior all out here, and I decided I'm not gonna put the interior back in because I'm just gonna have to take it out again when I go weld in the roll cage. So let's tighten down that last bolt and get the car on the ground. So the last bolt we need to tighten down on the coilover is this one right down here. This bolt connects the coilover to the axle and gets torqued down to 50 foot-pounds. Good. And our coilover is completely installed. Now we just need to get this brake line back into place, get that screw in there, and snug it down. And before we put the wheel back on, let's adjust the coilover. You always want to adjust the coilover with the suspension unloaded, so remove the jack. Now to adjust the ride height, all we have to do is turn these nuts right here. So I made sure the nuts on this coilover are threaded the same height as the nuts on the other coilover, so the ride height will be the same. Next, grab your coilover wrenches and then lock them around the two nuts like so, and tighten them into each other just like that. And now's a good time to adjust your valving. We have 18 clicks of adjustment, so I'm gonna increase it to 9, which is halfway, and then we'll know if we need to go stiffer or softer from there. And with that, we are done installing the coilovers. So let's get the wheel on, torque it down in a star pattern, and then jack up the car so we could remove the jack stands. Finally, lower the car back down, and don't forget the wood under the tire since the car is lowered now, and we want some clearance to remove the jack. And the reveal, moment of truth. Oh man, look at that. Check this car out lowered. Holy smokes, does that look so good? I can't believe it. Look at that. This car looks amazing. Now that is how you install coilovers. So we dropped the car 2.5 inches in the front and the back. The front still needs to get aligned. The toe, the camber, the caster all has to get aligned. So we're gonna go do that next, and then we're gonna go to the track. Now I'm kinda curious with it being so low if I'm gonna be able to get out of my driveway. Here goes, let's see what we got. This is the worst part, backing down the driveway, not knowing if you're gonna hit the bottom. But we'll take it nice and slow. Oh, just a little tap. And the front clears. Okay, the front just barely clears. I'm definitely gonna have to go in and out of this driveway at an angle from now on. So I'm on my way to the alignment shop. I wanted to give you guys my initial thoughts on these coilovers, and holy smokes, what a difference of a ride these things make. Now I did set them up so that they are a little bit stiffer for drifting, so they are stiffer than the stock springs, and I haven't really hit any turns or anything, but I hit so many bumps and you can just feel every single one of them, and you can feel all the divots in the road. Now that's my setup. You can set them up to be a little bit softer and be a little bit more forgiving on the road. But right now, what a difference. It's like a totally different car. I cannot believe it. I can't wait to get this thing aligned. Right now it feels like it's aligned pretty good from just eyeballing it, but I can't wait to get it dialed in and then head to the track. So let's get to that alignment shot. Wow. Right now the alignment guy's messing with my alignment. I asked him to max out the camber and give me stock caster and no toe. And I don't want to bother him, so I'm going to let him do his job. From what I saw, this guy did a really great job and was real careful, which is awesome, so thank you very much. So with the car dialed in, thank you very much, alignment guy. Now it is time to get to the track. Here goes. Let's see how the new coilovers handle and if they're as big of a deal as everyone says. Turn one. Oh man, I could feel a huge difference already. I was not expecting that at all. The car is so much more controllable and predictable. Turn two. Yes, this is awesome! And turn three. And I think I'm getting a little bit overexcited here. So the rest of the event was a blast, and it's basically learning a new car over again with these coilovers in. There's no body roll, the suspension's stiff and predictable, and I have a lot more control and, more importantly, confidence going around the corners. I can tell I'm hitting these corners a lot quicker than I used to, and the car is finally behaving. This is definitely something I should have done a lot sooner. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. If you are subscribed, we have some awesome stuff coming up, so stay tuned.